Ready? Both assistant state attorneys are present, both defense counsel and Mr. Sievers. State's ready?
Sure. Yes, Your Honor.
Defense is ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Bring them out. Please be seated. I'll ask our jurors again, have you followed my instructions, not talked about the case among yourselves with anybody else, or looked up any of the people or places involved? Even if you did so inadvertently, now would be the time to raise your hand and let me know. For the record, no jurors lifted their hand. Next witness.
Your Honor, defense calls Dr. Mark Petrites.
Yes, sir. Doctor, you're still under oath from the other day. Please be seated.
Good afternoon, Dr. Petrites.
Good afternoon.
Can you kind of, just for us, reintroduce yourself to the jury?
Yeah, Dr. Mark Petrites, P-E-T-R-I-T-E-S. I'm a retired general surgeon. I unfortunately was the one who happened to find Teresa in the house on the morning after.
And Doctor, I understand that you're a retired surgeon now.
Yes.
But when you were a practicing surgeon, where was your office?
It was in on 41 and Coconut Road, over by the Coconut Point Mall,
Okay.
Bonita Springs, Estero.
And I don't need you to give us your home address, but where was your home?
In Bonita Springs.
Okay. Was your home relatively close to Jarvis?
Yes.
Okay. And likewise, your office, while not as close as your home, was also relatively close to Jarvis, correct?
So our home was probably a 3 to 5 minute ride. From my office to her house was probably about a 10-minute drive.
Okay. I want to kind of address some of the things we didn't get a chance to talk about
Sure.
the first time you were up there. Sir, you have known Mr. Sievers to carry more than one phone, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you talked about a voicemail. Do you remember we played the voicemail here in court?
Yes. Yes, I do.
And you found it, you said it struck you as a little odd, is that correct?
Correct.
That voicemail, when was that left, you recall?
There was 2 voicemails. One was left the night before I found her, and one was left the morning that I found her.
Let's go to the night before.
Okay.
You were traveling that day, is that correct?
Correct.
And you were traveling back from Indiana to Florida, correct?
Correct.
And the reason is your wife had just started going to law school, is that correct?
Correct.
And her law school was in Indiana?
It was in Bloomington, Indiana.
Okay.
Lauer. Yes.
And up until then, you and your wife, you lived together pretty much continuously nonstop, is that correct?
Correct.
Is it fair to say that both you and she were going through a bit of an adjustment now with her going to live so far away for the next 3 years?
Yes.
Okay. And it was not uncommon for your wife to call and have correspondence with Mr. Sievers, correct?
I don't know what you mean by that.
I would say from time to time, they'd call, they'd text, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, after the murder, your wife had second thoughts about continuing on law school, didn't she?
No.
No? Okay.
In fact, it made her much more determined.
Did it?
Yes.
And what area of law does she practice in now?
She works for the state.
Okay. And she does appeals in capital cases just like this, doesn't she?
I don't know what this has to do with this, but yes.
Okay. And so You're a witness in Mr. Rogers' trial, is that correct?
Yes, I was.
And you had the opportunity then to sit through Mr. Rogers' entire trial and listen to all the evidence, is that correct?
Relevance.
Sir, you had the opportunity to sit through Mr. Rogers' entire trial and listen to all the evidence, is that correct?
Yes, I was released as a witness, so yes.
Okay. And sir, when Dr. Sievers was alive, was there ever occasions that if Mr. Sievers was out of town, that she would have you come and just check on her if she was alone in the house?
That happened once, yes it did.
Okay.
It wasn't a scheduled kind of a thing. She was scared. She had heard some noises in the house, and she called me and said she was scared.
Okay.
So,
Doctor, that's all I have for you. Thank you.
okay.
State.
Dr. Petrites, you said earlier that Mrs. Petrites works for the state.
Correct.
She doesn't work for the office of the state attorney, does she?
No, she does not.
She works for a different state law office,
Correct.
right? Okay. And when Mr. Sievers left you that voicemail message the day before, telling you that Teresa was out of town, would be back, you were still out of town, weren't you correct? All right. You were still out of town, isn't that correct?
No, I was home.
Okay.
Yes.
You had just gotten back?
I had just got back. Yes.
And Mr. Sievers knew that you and Mrs. Petrites were out of town, didn't he?
Yes, because that was the last time that I saw Teresa. It was right before we had left town. So it was probably, I believe it was about 2 weeks before her murder.
And he called you that Sunday to make sure you were back, isn't that correct?
Yes, he did.
Thank you.
No redirect, Your Honor.
Is this witness to be released or retained?
Released, Your Honor.
State?
Release, John.
Thank you, doctor. You're free to go.
Sure. Thank you.
Next witness.
Yes, defendant calls Monica Lyons.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Hi.
Will you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, hi. I am Monica Lyons.
And Ms. Lyons, I'm going to ask you to speak up. We have to hear you all the way back here, okay?
Okay.
The live mic is the smaller one.
This one
Yes,
here.
ma'am.
Okay. All right.
And Ms. Lyons, what do you do?
I'm an attorney,
What kind of an attorney?
primarily estate planning.
Okay. And where did you go to college?
I went to the University of Central Florida.
And did you attain a degree from the University of Central Florida?
Yes, I graduated with a degree in accounting
Okay. What year was that?
in 1992.
And did you get any further education after you graduated with your accounting degree?
Yes, I went to the University of Central Florida, I'm sorry, University of Florida, and went to the College of Law, went to law school.
And did you earn a degree from the University of Florida College of Law?
Yes, I graduated with honors from law school,
What year was that?
1995.
Okay. And at some point, did you seek admission into the Florida Bar?
Yes, in October, well, I took the bar exam over the summer after graduation and then passed the bar and was admitted to the bar.
Okay. And upon your admission to the bar, did your education stop there?
No, I went back to the University of Florida and entered their tax program and got a Master's of Law in Taxation, and that ended at the end of summer of 1996, and that's called an LLM in taxation.
Okay. And do you have any special certifications from the Florida Bar?
Yes, I have. I'm board certified in wills, trusts, and estates.
And in order to be board certified, what do you have to do?
Well, first you have to apply to the bar. There's a certification committee, and you have to apply to be allowed to sit for the exam. And I believe that process involves peer review also, and you have to submit a lot of information. And then they select a number of people that are allowed to sit for the exam. I think in my year, there may have been 22 people allowed to sit, and then maybe 30, and then the exam is held. And
Okay. And being a board certified attorney, what does that allow you to do that a non-board certified attorney can't do?
well, you can refer to yourself as an expert, like,
Okay.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so you can refer to yourself as an expert in wills, trusts, and estates, is that correct?
Yes.
And are you aware if the Florida Bar has any type of ramifications for a non-board certified attorney referring to him or herself as an expert?
Well, you can't do that.
Would you be subject to disciplinary action by the bar?
Yes, I would expect so.
After you were admitted to the bar and after you achieved your LLM, where was your first attorney job?
Well, I stayed in Gainesville, and I took a job with Shands Teaching Hospital and Clinics, Inc., which is the hospital that's associated with the University of Florida College, the medical school. And I was in-house counsel there.
Okay. And what did you do after that?
Well, after that, I worked with an attorney in Gainesville that was board certified in tax law, and worked with mainly estate planning, asset protection, business, succession planning,
Okay.
shareholder agreements.
And did you have any further employment opportunities after that?
Yeah, after that, I still in Gainesville, I worked for and with an amazing attorney, a Harvard-educated attorney that did work with high net worth families. And at that time, he was changing his practice, and it was an incredible opportunity. And we worked with extremely high net worth families that at the time could only come to the practice if they had a net worth of $25 million or above. And most of the families were in the $100 to $200 million range, but they were from across the country. And we worked with experts in the field. So it was a group of other attorneys that you would have somebody that was an expert in, let's say, offshore private placement life insurance, or a person who was really good at picking apart fees and knowing how fees were charged, or a person who was really good at planning and investment. So it was a group of, it was an amazing team from across the country for planning, doing charitable work, charitable planning strategies, and it was very thorough work. And you would be with these people for years, creating their family offices and doing really special work.
And, thank you, Ms. Lyons. What area of practice do you do presently?
Well, I do estate planning mostly, but also creating charities, 501c3s, and with the estate planning, a lot of the clients have their own businesses, and sometimes I just do business work on its own, creating shareholder agreements, partnership agreements, buy-sells, and with the estate planning, you're always thinking asset protection, even for anybody like myself. You just want to make sure your house and your cars and your bank, your accounts are protected. In case a child gets divorced, you want to make sure that what they get doesn't get taken. So even, it doesn't matter how much you have, you want to make sure it's safe.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for a moment, I want to talk about something you don't do.
Okay.
Have you ever litigated?
Myself,
Yes.
personally, I have not personally litigated. I've been in firms that have, and then I've helped with explaining maybe the probate or the, estate planning side, but I'm not a litigator.
When was the last time you were in a courthouse before today?
Well, I've never been with a jury ever, so, yeah.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit, first of all, you mentioned you do estate planning. What is estate planning?
What is an estate plan?
What is estate planning?
Oh, what is estate planning?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I see it as taking care of your family and your things, both during lifetime and at death.
Okay. And are there certain documents that you draft to effectuate this goal?
Yes.
Okay. Let's start with the one that most people have heard about, wills. Just real quick, what's a will?
Okay, well, a will is a written document, and it has certain formalities to it. You have to be competent, over 18, not under duress when you sign it. It has to have certain formalities when you sign it. But it's basically to cover what happens to your things. It's a basic document that will be filed with the court after you pass away, whether or not a probate is needed. Probate is the process of transferring assets through using the court system after death.
Okay. And what is a durable power of attorney?
Okay, a durable power of attorney would be, again, paper that you sign where you name somebody to manage or take care of assets for you, sign checks if you can't do that for yourself during your lifetime because you're incapacitated temporarily. Maybe you're in the hospital having surgery, or maybe you're out of the country, and for some reason you can't do it.
Okay.
So,
And finally, what is a living will?
all right, a living will is the document where you are, well, it can be oral or it can be written, but normally it's written, and it's your declaration saying basically what you don't want to happen if you were in a coma or a vegetative state, meaning I don't want continuation of life-prolonging procedures. It's kind of the pull the plug document, if you want to put it crassly.
Okay. And finally, what is a trust?
A trust. It's a written document. If it deals with, to say what happens to what you want to have something, let me take that back. It's like a will, but it can take effect right now. And it says, what do you want to have happen with some of your things? It can take effect now or take effect at your death. If it's dealing with your death, it has to have the same formalities, the written formalities as your will. But for instance, you can have a pet care trust for your pet to say, take care of my pet in this way. Or you can have a trust that deals with all of your assets, like your house and your car. And it operates outside of the court system normally. So it can be considered a will substitute, but it has to have the same formalities and it has the same protections. We have statutes. So it's a way to take care of your family.
So does a trust allow one person to manage assets for the benefit of another person?
Yes, that would be a way to say that, yes.
Okay. And can you tell me if there's a difference between a revocable versus an irrevocable trust?
Yes, there's a difference.
Okay, let's start with a revocable trust. What is a revocable trust?
Well, revocable means you can revoke it. So you've signed some paper and you can amend it. You can make changes to it at any time that you want. It also means from a tax standpoint that if you put assets into it, which, okay, you've signed a paper, how do you put assets into it? But you've maybe retitled something at the bank, so now it's owned by the trust, or you've had a deed that transfers it into the trust, or you've assigned an asset into it. So you've put assets into this revocable trust. Well, you can take it out also. But from a tax standpoint, it uses your Social Security number because it's revocable. So it's as if nothing's happened as far as the IRS is concerned. So that's another part of a revocable trust.
Okay, well, how is that then different from an irrevocable trust?
Well, irrevocable is just as it says. It's irrevocable. So once you've signed it, you can't make changes to it. And it's now like a little person or a corporation. It gets its own tax identification number. It can get its own bank account. If it has any assets that earn enough income, it has to file a tax return. But instead of a 1040, like I would file, it files a 1041, and it has to pay an enormous amount of income tax, whereas once it reaches $12,000 in income, it's filing enough taxes like it's a rich person, taxed at the highest threshold.
And I want to get into, for lack of a better term, the three people that we're going to talk about when we talk about a trust. Okay, so let's start with the first person. Who's a settlor?
Okay, a settlor. Settlor is also called a grantor, but that's the person who created the trust. It's also the person who usually is the person that's putting the money or the assets into the trust.
Okay. Who is the trustee?
The trustee is the fiduciary, the person who is named in the document or appointed later by a court or by the beneficiaries perhaps. But that is the person with the duty of loyalty, a fiduciary duty to follow the terms of the trust, but the duties to the beneficiary.
And when we talk about a fiduciary duty, is that when one person has a legal obligation to place the interest of another person before their own?
The trustee does.
Yes. And finally, What's a beneficiary?
In terms of a trust, the beneficiary would be any person who is named in the trust as a person who's going to receive a benefit, income, principal, either now or in the future.
Okay. And had you been practicing in wills, trusts, and estates back in 2008 and 2009?
Yes.
Okay. And during that time, did you ever come to meet someone who would become known to you as either Mark and or Teresa Sievers?
Yes.
Okay. And how did you come to meet Dr. Sievers and Mr. Sievers?
Well, my very close friend from high school was a psychologist in St. Petersburg who was a patient and friend of Dr. Sievers. And when I moved here, she knew that Teresa was moving here, so she said, if you need a doctor, call her. So that's how I came to know Teresa and Mark.
Okay. And during the course of your relationship with Dr. Sievers, did they ever come to you to do any estate planning?
Yes.
Okay. And, Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes, sir. Item?
This is Defendant's Exhibit 10. I've shown it to the state already. Ma'am, will you take a look at this?
Okay.
Do you know what that document is?
Yes.
What is it?
This is the Teresa A. Sievers Irrevocable Trust Agreement dated September 4th, 2009, with Mark D. Sievers as trustee.
How do you know what that document is?
I wrote it.
Okay,
Yeah.
when did you write it?
Well, it would have started in 2008. I'm not exactly sure when I started it.
When did you finish it?
It would have been right around the time of the execution.
Okay. And will you do me a favor? Look through that document, and if you believe that it has been changed in any way since you first drafted it, would you let us know?
Okay. Yeah, that, this document is the same. It just has the EIN attached. It wasn't
Okay.
part of it at the time.
Is that document then a fair and accurate copy of the document that you drafted for Teresa Sievers?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd like to move what has been previously marked as Defendant's Exhibit 10 and as Defendant's 10.
No objection.
We'll show it admitted.
Okay. I want to go through that document if it's okay.
Okay.
First, let's take a step back and talk about why you would draft an irrevocable trust for someone. What's the purpose? What benefit would somebody get from an irrevocable trust?
In general?
In general.
Well, there's, when you have an irrevocable trust, the assets inside the irrevocable trust, if it's done properly, are usually outside of your estate at the time of your death. If you've transferred assets and given them away during your lifetime, they are often not included in your estate at the time of your death for federal estate tax purposes. And that will save money at the time of death, because let's say back in 2000 the estate tax exemption used to be that if you had assets in excess of $600,000, then there would be an estate tax of maybe 50% on everything over $600,000. And then it went up that you could have $1 million before you had to pay the tax. And then it went up, kept going up more and more to $2 million, and then $3 million. And so when you put it inside an irrevocable trust, then you've given it away, and if you don't have any, what they call incidents of ownership in it at the time of your death, and you've done all the right things, then the IRS says, oh, well, you didn't own it when you died, so we're not going to count it in your estate. That's one of the ways you can make it so you don't, the IRS won't count it. So it could save money. So for a lot of wealthier people, that was a great planning mechanism to avoid estate tax or minimize it.
Okay. Give me just a moment. I'm looking through a couple documents.
Okay.
Because I want to talk a little
Okay.
more specifically about this document.
Okay.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
All right. Ma'am, handing you what's been marked as 63B. Will you take a look at that? Actually, it's already admitted. Can you tell me what that document is?
Okay. Okay. Okay, well, so this is all together, right?
This,
Okay.
yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, the first part of this is, it's a policy, or it's specifications for a policy for the trust on the life of Teresa for a term policy.
Okay, I'm going
Yeah.
to stop you right there.
Yeah.
So that policy that you have in your hand, that policy would then fund the trust that you drafted, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what is the amount on that policy?
This is 2.5 million, 2.5 million.
$2.5 million.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to talk to you now about, we're going to kind of move forward in time
Yeah.
to when the trust that you drafted gets funded, okay? When a trust gets funded, is that just a free-for-all? Will this irrevocable trust, can anybody just start pulling money out of there?
Oh, no, definitely not.
Okay. What was the legal or monetary advantage to putting this policy proceeds into this irrevocable trust?
I'm sorry, could you say that?
What was the advantage of putting the proceeds of that $2.5 million policy, and that was from Ohio Life, is that Ohio National?
This is the, let's see. Yes, this is the Ohio policy, yes.
And what's the advantage of putting life insurance money into an irrevocable trust?
Okay, well, may I speak about her other policy?
I just want you to
Okay,
answer
the
this,
policy.
okay?
Okay. Well, if the trustee buys fresh life insurance on the life of the person who created the trust, then we don't have the look-back period that you would have if you transferred an existing policy to a trust. Because normally when you create what we call an ILIT, an Irrevocable Life Insurance Trust, when you create this, when an attorney creates this, if the client has an existing life insurance trust, and you never know if someone is going to be able to get more life insurance, but what you want to have happen is you want the trustee to go out and buy a new policy, because that new policy that has to be bought by the trustee has to apply for the policy, and it has to be owned by the trust, and the trust has to be the beneficiary. So if those three things happen, then if the insured passes away the next day, God forbid, then from the IRS standpoint, the proceeds are not included in their estate. But if you take an existing life insurance policy that they already have and just transfer it over, meaning they sign a little form and say, okay, we're going to take my life insurance, and instead of me owning it or someone else owning it, I'm going to move it over into my trust right here. The IRS says, okay, that's fine, and it's in the trust, the money will go there, but for 3 years, you don't get that estate tax, freebie. We're still going to tax it at whatever percent. And if we're in a situation where you don't have that much estate tax exemption, it could be taxed at 40 or 50%, depending on where we are with the estate tax exemption. So that's the advantage.
Can I stop you there?
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, so you said something, 40 or 50%?
Well, yeah, it depends on where we are with where the service is and where we are with Congress.
Okay.
Congress.
And so who sets the threshold of when that estate tax kicks in?
Well, the Internal Revenue Code.
Okay, and is it something that's maintained the same threshold for year after year after year, or does it tend to change whenever we get a new administration?
It's been very much in flux. Yeah.
Okay. And if it's in flux, is it fair to say that we as attorneys are terrified of risk?
As to relevancy, Your Honor.
Sustained.
As to relevance.
Sustained.
If it's in flux, do you as an estate planning attorney try to limit the risk for your clients?
Yes.
Okay. And is formulating a irrevocable life insurance trust or an ILIT one way you accomplish that goal?
Yes.
Okay. When you met with the Sievers in 2008, 2009, did you give them any advice with respect to their life insurance?
Yes.
Okay. What advice did you give them with respect to their life insurance?
Okay, well, they had existing policies.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you say they, did Mr. Sievers also have a policy?
Well, yeah, they each had $2.5 million term policies. So Mark had $2.5 million, and Teresa had $2.5 million, And then Mark had $100,000 and Teresa had a $300,000 policy that they'd had for a while. And,
Can I stop you there?
yeah,
You said term policy. Is there a difference between term and whole life?
well, yes, a term policy is, well, it's less expensive, and then if you don't pay the premium, it just goes away.
What about a whole life policy?
Well, whole life policy, it basically after you have it for a couple years, it's much more expensive. But after you've had it for a couple years, then you've sort of paid for a certain amount of it. So if you stopped paying the premium, let's say after year 3 or 4, and you never paid a premium, you'd still have a part of the death benefit that would be there, and it can build up cash. So it's especially for, well, it's a good investment because the cash grows. It's a good investment. It's protected from creditors.
Okay.
So, yeah.
With a whole life policy, can you borrow against a whole life policy?
Yes, you
Can you borrow against a term policy?
Well, there's no cash in a term policy.
Okay. So with whole life, you're putting cash into a pot, and after a certain amount of time, then you can access that cash. Is that correct?
Yes, and it's especially, it's protected from creditor claims. So when you have a high risk, a doctor is someone you kind of think of as more of a high risk because of the nature of the profession. So that's always something good for a doctor to have as an investment if they can do that.
Okay. But going back to what you said,
Sorry, yeah.
I'm sorry I keep interrupting, but you keep mentioning these terms, and I don't know if everyone understands the difference between term and whole life. But you said that they each had a 2.5 term policy.
Yes.
Okay. And given Dr. Teresa Sievers' profession, did you, in your opinion, believe that was sufficient to cover her in her present circumstance?
Objection is to relevancy, Your Honor.
No. Okay. Can you rephrase your, because I got a little thrown off there.
I'm going
Sorry.
to repeat the question.
Yeah. 'Cause-
Okay. So when the Sievers came
Yeah.
to you for estate planning,
Mm-hmm.
and they told you what life insurance they currently had, did
Mm-hmm.
you believe that they had sufficient life insurance to cover their situation?
I did not believe that either of them had sufficient life insurance.
Okay. Well, let's address Dr. Sievers
Yes.
specifically, okay? Were you familiar with her practice by that time?
Yes, and I was getting more familiar as the time went on.
Okay. And given that you do practice in business and business planning, had you formulated a belief that practice was growing?
I did for several reasons. Well, first of all, Teresa was one of the most dynamic people I had ever met in my entire life, working and knowing entrepreneurs and knowing amazing people who do charitable works around the world, people who she was just an incredible person, and also knowing wealthy people. So wealth doesn't mean that they're an amazing person, but she just, it was like watching Oprah when she was doing her first television broadcast, just knowing that this person is going to be known everywhere. So that's how I felt about her, and having worked with a lot of doctors at Shands and knowing certain doctors that had done some incredible things, and also entrepreneurs, I just felt that she personally was going to be very successful beyond just being a doctor known in Naples or the South Florida area. So there was that. But just in general, that she needed more life insurance. Because,
Let me ask you this. When you said she needed more life insurance, are there different reasons why different people purchase life insurance?
well, yes.
Okay. And I want to go back to Teresa with respect to her medical practice. At that time, was her medical practice expanding?
Well, the medical practice was shifting its objectives
Okay.
from a traditional medical practice that was insurance to a different model. And there were things, we were working with the CPAs, so we would have a lot of conversations and between the office manager, which was Mark, and and he served as a manager of the businesses, so we would have conversations about that and the vitamin businesses and those things, and so it was expanding. And the thought is, at some point, she's going to need a partner, and she was moving more into, she later did get additional training and schooling, and we formed, well, Mark actually did the formation at the suggestion of the CPA, but we did, forming the restorative health.
I want to stop you there.
Okay.
You said that you anticipated that at some point she would likely get a partner. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
if we could, yeah.
And I guess I'm missing it. What is the connection between having a business partner and life insurance?
Okay, well, the life insurance in any business would be used to help fund the buyout. And when you have a buy-sell agreement, there would be life insurance, and it could be owned by the business, or it could be owned by the individual or the family, but you would use it, and it could be loaned for the purpose of helping to pay and fund the buyout when the person dies, to have their shares bought back by the business, and so that's why you would need it if you have another partner. And you need to get that life insurance while you're still insurable, because you don't know if something's going to happen to make you less insurable.
Well, let me ask you this. When people get life insurance, is it less expensive to insure somebody in their 20s than it is to insure somebody in their 80s?
Yeah, in their 20s.
Okay.
Yeah.
And why is that?
Well, they have these actuarial tables. So life insurance is based on formulas, based on longevity, and based on health. And so the younger the person is, they figure there's less chance of them dying, so it's less expensive.
Okay. And so generally, is it fair to say there's no better time to get life insurance than right now?
Yeah.
Okay. And so if Dr. Sievers were to get additional insurance, could the beneficiary be changed?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And does changing a beneficiary, does that affect the premium?
No.
Okay.
No.
I want to kind of shift now. We talked about why life insurance is important for a partner for a buy-sell. How is life insurance useful in a high net worth estate?
Okay, well, in a high net worth estate, and remember, high net worth estate, that used to be $600,000 when I got out of law school. Okay, that was the family that had to pay estate tax. So, and then it was $1 million. And, right now it's big, but it's in 2025, it's scheduled to go back to $5 million. So it just depends on Congress and what the law is going to be. So when we say high net worth, it depends on where we are with the tax law. So the estate tax is due 9 months after somebody dies, if somebody has to pay, if the estate has to pay it. So you can extend the time you have to file the tax return with the IRS, but they don't give you an extension on when you have to write the check. So that means often liquidating assets. And if you have life insurance, that is a way to have cash. And you don't have to sell things, you don't have to, so that's really a primary reason that, from a planning standpoint, of obtaining life insurance.
So the life insurance then is used as a tool to pay the estate tax in a high net worth estate.
Yes, and it's often loaned to the estate for that purpose.
Okay. And so then, is there a purpose then between having some life insurance go into the islet and some stay outside the islet?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I want to address some of the specific things contained within the islet. Okay. Can a trustee make a gift to a beneficiary out of the islet?
No,
Okay.
no.
Why not?
That's not a role of a trustee to make a gift.
Okay. What is the role of the trustee?
Well, the trustee, first of all, has to administer the trust in accordance with the terms. And they are a fiduciary. So it can be an individual, it can be a bank, a trust company, a lawyer, somebody like that.
Is there some type of ascertainable standard that is going to direct a trustee as to when a distribution is appropriate as opposed to inappropriate?
In this trust?
Yes.
There is in this particular trust, yes.
Okay. And in this particular trust, what is that ascertainable standard?
It is the health, education, maintenance, and support.
HEMS.
HEMS, yeah.
Okay.
it's from the
And
state.
why is that particular language in this trust?
Why is it in here?
Yes.
Okay, well, there's several reasons. First, the ascertainable standard of health, education, maintenance, and support. That comes directly out of the Internal Revenue Code, and then it's also straight out of the Florida statutes. But if you use that as your direction to a trustee to say, this is how you can make a distribution to a beneficiary, then first of all, it's guidance that has a lot of interpretation by case law, and it's a known standard. It's actually called the ascertainable standard. But it also means that you just can't go making a distribution just for any old reason. It has to be for a clear need of health, education, maintenance, and support. And you have to look at those, each, in this case, you would look at each beneficiary to determine if they actually needed money for those purposes.
Well, let's say that a trustee just starts taking funds out and just going to town. Would there be a cause of action if the trustee's actions were detrimental to one or more beneficiaries?
Oh, yes, absolutely, yes.
Okay, so is there judicial oversight with respect to trusts?
Well, trusts, yeah, there is, yeah. I mean, trusts normally operate, they just operate, but yes, there is. And there would be definite consequences for that.
And when I say judicial oversight, I don't mean that a court is looking over
Yeah.
every trust. However, if there is some wrongdoing,
Definitely.
then there's a remedy, is that correct?
Absolutely. And there has to be accountings done all the time on the trust,
How often does the accounting have to happen?
at least every year.
Hold on just a second. I'm going to take some exhibits from you, okay?
Okay,
I'm going to leave the trust exhibit with you, okay?
Okay.
And I'm going to take 63B,
okay.
all right? And Madam Clerk, 63B came in a larger 63 that I'm going to return to you right now. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Exhibit number?
Counsel,
This is going to be 64B2.
I'm sorry, B, boy,
B as in boy, dash 2.
thank you.
Ma'am, will you take a look at that? Okay, just look up when you're ready.
Okay,
Go ahead, I'm going to give you the rest of that exhibit, including 64B1, if you want to
oh,
look at.
this goes with this?
That goes with that. If you want to look at 64B1 as well.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right.
Okay, can you tell the jury what 64B1 is?
Well, this is what's an IRA annuity?
Okay, and I kind of want to highlight some of the differences between an IRA and life insurance. Okay, first, does an IRA have a death benefit?
No.
Okay. Second, is the IRA's value contingent upon, to an extent, the contributions made into it?
Well, yes.
Okay. And an IRA or an individual retirement annuity or individual retirement account, what's the whole purpose of an IRA?
Well, you would make contributions to it based on how much you're allowed to put in, and it grows income tax-free until you are allowed to take withdrawals.
When are you allowed to take withdrawals?
Well, you're forced to take them at a certain age depending on the type.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Let's say that you were under age 55, and you take a rollover or a distribution on an IRA.
Take a distribution?
Yep.
Okay.
What are the consequences of taking a distribution on an IRA if you are not yet 55?
You object as to relevancy, Your Honor?
It'd
Can
be a
you-
penalty.
What kind of penalty?
Well, you have to pay a tax penalty and pay income.
So, if I understand this, generally speaking, IRA contributions are typically done through payroll, is that correct?
They can be.
And depending on if it's a Roth IRA or different types of IRA, do some IRAs avoid taxation when they go directly into the IRA?
It can. It
Okay,
can.
okay.
Yeah.
And so, when you take money out of an IRA prematurely, is that more detrimental than if you had just never put the money into an IRA at all?
It's not a good idea. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sir, what I am?
This is 62A and 62B. Your Honor, this is a Prudential policy.
Am I giving this back
Yep,
to
you're
you?
going to give that back to me.
Okay.
I'm going to give this to you. Okay, I'm going to swap.
Okay.
Have you had a chance to look at 62A and B?
A and, yeah, well, this thing here, yes.
Okay, yep, that thing there. What is that?
This is a Prudential life insurance policy on Teresa Sievers for $2.5 million.
Can you tell me when that life insurance policy was first purchased?
On November 18th, 2005.
Okay. Can you tell me who the beneficiaries are?
According to this?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, the first beneficiary is Mark,
Okay.
and the second beneficiary is Josephine Sievers, their daughter.
Okay. And to your knowledge, at that time, had the Sievers' second daughter been born yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Sometimes with life insurance policies, do life insurance policies sometimes change policy holders, or or sometimes they bought and sold?
Bought and sold.
The policy, or the companies. So sometimes company will start out owning a policy, and then they'll transfer the policy to another company?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And finally, I'm going to have you look at 61 A and B. It's a State Farm life insurance policy. Take a look at that one.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Who's the policyholder?
Policy, well, the policy holder, you mean the insured or the company?
Well, who's the company? Who's the company?
It's a State Farm life insurance policy.
Okay, and who is the insured?
Teresa Sievers.
Okay, does it say Teresa Sievers, or does it say Teresa Cousins?
Well, the paper, it was initially, I apologize, it was initially issued in the name of Teresa Ann Cousins,
Okay, and when was that issued?
November 1st, 2000.
And how much, what's the death benefit on that policy?
$300,000.
Do you know why it might be issued on the life of Teresa Cousins?
That was, her first husband was Mr. Cousins, Kenny
Okay.
Cousins.
So is it fair to say that this, this policy actually predates her marriage to Mr. Sievers?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So wait, hold on, I think this goes with the,
It should be all stated again.
Oh, okay.
Your trust should be the only document that's not stated.
okay, so
Okay.
you're taking
And I'm gonna
this
take
back to?
that back to you.
Okay.
Give it back to the clerk.
Okay.
I want to go back now to speaking about the islet, okay? Is it expected that an islet will generate its own income?
During the life of the insured or afterwards?
Afterwards?
Yes, because it would have the money from the death benefit, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there'd be income earned.
And with trusts, is the money expected to be invested?
Yes.
And what happens to any dividends? What happens to the proceeds of the investments?
The proceeds, the dividends and the proceeds, will they be
Yes.
subject to income tax?
How much income tax?
Well, once the trust reaches $12,000, just a little over $12,000 in income, it's taxed at, I think, 37%, plus there's an additional tax on net investment income, so it's a very high tax. So you have to, from a planning standpoint, you have to get that income out of the trust.
And how do you do that?
You distribute it out. And what happens is with a trust, you distribute the income out to a beneficiary. And when you do that, they get well, they get something called a K-1, a little statement that goes along with the trust tax return. And then the beneficiary or beneficiaries pay the income tax instead of the trust on that income.
Okay. And at the time you drafted the trust, could you tell or would you know what that trust income would be?
No, you wouldn't know at the time. You just would know you would have to have a mechanism for getting it out.
Okay. Let me ask you about the life insurance trust and what it's designed to do or not do. Is the life insurance trust designed to act as a windfall, a major lifestyle upgrade?
No. It's meant to be a protection for the family, but it's really meant to pay. It's there to serve to pay the taxes. In the event we have an estate tax liability, this is purchased with that knowledge. It's also when we had these meetings, we knew that we could have estate tax exposure. We also knew we needed money to keep the practice going in terms of having key man insurance. We also knew that she could be getting a partner. So we had to have money available for those purposes. So there were decisions that were made by Teresa and conversations between me and the accountant. And there were decisions that were made in terms of obtaining life insurance, and she made decisions in terms of keeping some of it outside of the life insurance trust and having some of it purchased by the trustee to keep it inside the life insurance trust. And so, no, it's not a windfall at all, from my perspective.
Is the irrevocable trust only designed to last for one generation of beneficiaries?
If it doesn't have to, it can go on if necessary. So it's there for the girls. So it would be for them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what if the girls have children and the trust is still in existence?
Well, in this case, the girls would receive at a certain age, but if they weren't able to because they were disabled, if something had happened to them, then it would continue on for them and eventually go to their children. So it had like a dynasty trust built into it if necessary, but if they were competent, weren't under some disability of some nature, then they could eventually get it. It would be distributed outright to them at a certain age. It would have been 35, but there was, again, like flexibility built in for those reasons. Or if one of them had died, it would be held for their children.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have trust. Make sure all the pages are right on there. That page too. Your Honor, I am returning Defendant's Exhibit A to Madam Clerk. With that, Ms. Lyons, thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay.
State.
Thank you, Your Honor. Madam Clerk, if I might, before you put those away, just ask for, I think it's State's Exhibit 61. Let me just start with this very quickly. State's Exhibit 61 was the State Farm Life Insurance Company documents that you just looked at.
Okay.
And you remember how you said Teresa Sievers and then ended up discussing Teresa Cousins, correct?
Yes.
But when you look through these documents, Teresa Sievers actually changed the documents from Teresa Sievers Cousins to Teresa Sievers, did she not?
Yes, as I recall.
And she also changed the primary beneficiary to Mark Sievers
Yes.
as well, correct?
Yes.
Now, we've been spending a lot of time talking about multiple types of trusts and different types of IRAs and other financial instruments. Let's just start with that irrevocable trust for a moment. Are you aware that the Prudential insurance policy, which had a face value of $2.5 million plus whatever interest, was funded and placed into Teresa Sievers' irrevocable trust upon her death?
The one that was purchased by the trustee?
I'm talking about the Prudential insurance policy that you reviewed just a few moments ago.
Okay. That it was placed into the islet?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
And you're aware the Ohio National, both the 2.5 million valued policy as well as the 0.5 million, which, so $500,000, was also placed into that islet upon the death of Teresa Sievers.
Okay, okay.
And I think you just indicated that the State Farm insurance policy that we were just looking at was payable directly to Mark Sievers, is that correct?
Yes, according to that paper, yeah.
And the Jackson Life, that IRA that you referred to, which I think around the time of Teresa Sievers' death, I believe had a value of about $127,000. That IRA, when an individual dies, the IRA funds don't just evaporate, correct?
No.
So they actually pass to a beneficiary upon death.
Yes, there's a name beneficiary or something.
And that IRA, the named beneficiary was Mark Sievers, correct?
I believe that's what that document had said, yes.
So let's talk now about that irrevocable trust that was dated September 4th of 2009. As you indicated, in terms of the financial challenges to having money accumulate in a trust and the tax after $12,000, that trust allows the trustee to withdraw the full income from the trust every year, correct?
They're required to.
And so while math doesn't seem to be everyone's specialty, and perhaps not mine either, but with a $5.5 million in a trust, if we were looking at 10% of an income a year, we'd be talking $550,000 of income generated by the trust.
If a trust could, if there was that much income, I'd
And so if we just have that and thought that the trust assets, which you indicated should be invested, read 5% a year, we'd be talking about $275,000 of income that the trustee would be required to take from the trust. Is that correct?
Well, the trustee would be required to distribute out the income from the trust, yes, that's standard. And then the settlor has to pick how that gets distributed, so she had to pick how does that go. So she made the selection of where it would go.
And she selected her spouse. She selected that Mark Sievers was both the trustee and would get the entirety of that annual income, correct?
Yes.
And in addition to that annual income that the trustee would be required to give to the spouse, and in this case, the trustee and spouse are one, but even if the trustees changed, the trustee would be required to give to the spouse, and that spouse was Mark Sievers. That's every year, correct? In addition,
Yes.
the trustee, thank you, the trustee in addition could take 5% of the principal out every year as the trust agreement was written, correct? I mean, take 5% not of the income of the principal. In other words, 5% of the 5.5 million could be withdrawn every year automatically under the provisions of this irrevocable trust, correct?
There was a 5 and 5 power under the document, which is a standard inclusion when you have an irrevocable trust of this nature. To include that, it's a power that allows the beneficiary to have that right. A spouse, it's only available to a spouse.
But it's available to the spouse, and the spouse was Mark Sievers, correct?
Yeah, and that's just a standard, it comes straight out of the Internal Revenue Code, so it's really kind of just a standard thing that you would put in an irrevocable life insurance trust. And there's, yeah.
And the trust that, this irrevocable life trust that we are talking about here in the court, which has been marked and introduced as State's Exhibit Number 10, that September 9th, 2009 trust into which Teresa Sievers became the settlor in creating that, it also allows the trustee to take additional distribution with generous access to the assets of the trust, correct?
That's actually limited more. The distribution standard is health, education, maintenance, and support. It is allowed to be liberal. However, in order to make a distribution, that trustee has to look at what is available to each beneficiary outside of that trust. So if that beneficiary has other assets, such as the income that is coming out, then that trustee would be hard-pressed to make a distribution. So in terms of Mark, if he is receiving that income, the trustee would, in my opinion, likely be not able to make a distribution to Mark out of that trust.
Well, in this trust, as it's drafted under the disposition of the trust upon the grantor's death, and the provisions for if my spouse survives me, under the second paragraph under there, it says my trustee, who in this case is Mark Sievers, also the spouse, it says, my trustee shall be liberal in making discretionary distribution, even to the extent of exhausting the family trust. My trustee shall consider the needs of my spouse before making a distribution to or for the benefit of any other beneficiary, as it is my primary intention to care for my spouse.
Yes,
Correct?
Yes. And if I could elaborate on that, because this is important. All right, when you say that you're going to be liberal, and when you say that you can exhaust the trust, you're looking at health, education, maintenance, and support. And if you don't say that you can be liberal and exhaust the trust, you're thinking health. If someone needs a bone marrow transplant, if someone needs something that is not offered in the United States, but this is some potential like cancer treatment that is not authorized by the FDA, trust me, I've sat in rooms where the bankers are debating.
Objection, Your Honor, this goes way beyond the state's question.
I'm sorry.
No,
But this is important because it's going to.
Ma'am, let me ask another question. Section 2 talks about maintenance. Maintenance can be a reason for actually accessing, not just the income comes automatically. Maintenance can be a reason for accessing the asset, the main asset of the trust. Isn't that correct? That's listed in the document that you drafted.
Okay. Well, health, maintenance, any of those items can be used to access principal if that's what you're asking.
That's what I'm asking, maintenance.
However, there has to be a need that is demonstrated.
So maintenance can be the purchase of a home in order to provide shelter for children.
It has to be within the standard of living that the person was accustomed to prior to the, when the funding of the trust took place, like prior to the death of the person. So you have to look at the trustee, and this, in this case is Mark, but it could be a different person or it could be a professional.
But it's
trustee.
not.
But it
We wanna
doesn't matter.
talk
We have the
about
same
this
fiduciary
particular-
standard.
Want to talk about this
Okay.
particular trust.
Okay.
Not trusts in general.
But, okay, we are.
The actual trust here, in which the trustee and the spouse are one, and which it is not an institutional trust,
Okay.
but it is a personal trust with a personally named representative, a trustee, and a spouse as the principal beneficiary. All we want to talk about. You talked about court overview, but in fact, there is no court overview of individual trusts. Isn't that correct?
A trust will operate outside of the court. However, the trust can be, the trustee has a duty to account each year to the trust beneficiaries, and those trust beneficiaries or a person acting on their behalf at any time can bring a cause of action against that trustee.
Exactly. And so Mark Sievers, as the spouse, could bring a cause of action against Mark Sievers as the trustee if Mark Sievers felt that the trust wasn't making appropriate distributions. Is that correct?
We have the minor children involved, and we have a lot of people who are looking out for those minor children. And because they're minors, that cause of action is not going to accrue.
And those minor children are the children of the spouse and of the trustee. Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
Some of the provisions of the trust that you were speaking of actually expired and were no longer in effect upon Teresa Sievers' death. Isn't that correct?
I'm sorry, I don't know which one you're talking about.
Some of the provisions of the trust, this 27-page document, some of the provisions of this trust expired upon the death of Teresa Sievers. Isn't that correct?
You mean terms about what happens during her lifetime?
Exactly.
Yes.
And as you said, the purpose of an irrevocable trust, one of the purposes is to shelter assets from taxes upon the death of an individual.
Yes, yes.
And in fact, creditors cannot get to those assets if it's set up properly in a trust. Isn't that correct?
Some creditors can reach them.
Well, a marital trust would prevent creditors from reaching any of the assets of the, would prevent the creditor of the deceased spouse. That creditor for those deceased spouse, those creditors would not be able to access any of the benefits of that trust. Isn't that correct?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
You have a trust, two spouses. First spouse passes away. You have a remaining spouse. Creditors of the first spouse cannot access the assets of that marital trust from the second spouse.
Okay, it's not a marital trust it's not a marital trust, but you're saying that the creditors of the first spouse, the irrevocable trust, because you're speaking about the
I'm asking that when you
irrevocable
have a
trust.
marital trust, isn't it true that it prevents the creditors from the spouse that dies from accessing the assets of the marital trust that is now in the hands of the surviving spouse?
Well, a revocable trust is subject to the claims of the creditors of the estate of the decedent.
But a marital
But-
trust,
I'm
Well-
sorry, but what?
a marital trust.
Okay, but this wasn't a marital trust. An irrevocable, I think I know what you're trying to ask.
I don't know if you do.
Okay.
So if you cannot answer that question, let me ask a different question.
Okay.
You sent a memo to Mark Sievers and Teresa Sievers, and you told them how to transfer assets to the trust, correct? You sent a memorandum to them after you had prepared all of these, and you told them how to go about transferring assets to the trust, correct?
I believe I did, yes.
And in fact, you told them in that memo that the trustee holds legal title to the trust. You made a point of letting them know that the trust doesn't have the legal title. The trustee has the legal title. And you put that in writing for them in the memo that you gave to them. Isn't that correct?
I believe I did.
And in fact, in advising the Sievers, you emphasized, as I think you've talked about here today, that Mark Sievers needed to apply for the life insurance, that Mark Sievers needed to make the payments for the life insurance in order to protect those assets from the tax liability. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And you briefly talked about Mark Sievers being the first beneficiary and Josephine being the second beneficiary. Do you remember when you were talking about that in terms of looking at one of the policies?
On one of the policies?
The first beneficiary is the primary beneficiary, the person to whom the funds come. Isn't that correct? And a secondary beneficiary, the second beneficiary, is only if the first has not survived. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Just a moment, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right, I want to touch on a couple things that we talked about. Ms. Ross asked you about when Teresa Sievers was known as Teresa Cousins. And in a will or life insurance, given your knowledge of the laws of the state of Florida, what effect will a dissolution of marriage have on testamentary rights?
Under a will, then it's as if they've predeceased.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Under a will, they've predeceased.
Thank you.
And if it's a life insurance policy, then that life insurance policy, that goes into the estate, correct?
Yes.
Talked about the 5 and 5 provision. And that 5 and 5 provision, you inserted into the trust in accordance with the IRS code, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Does that 5 and 5, does that alleviate any fiduciary responsibility to act for health?
No.
Okay. And when we talk about maintenance, what are we talking about in as far as the maintenance of a person?
Well, it's things that they need for their care. I mean, we're talking about they've already got their health, but it's maybe clothing, food. I mean, it could include shelter, but that's not usually what you would think of. It's really their day-to-day maintenance. But it does have to be, that's,
Objection, Your Honor. No question pending.
okay.
Does the maintenance have to be in accordance with the lifestyle at or about the time of death?
It does, and there can be a slight, improvement in the lifestyle, but you can't just become a windfall of of lifestyle. And that this is just how it is, not just in this situation. This is just standard practice for trusts.
Speaking
And-
of, let me ask you this. When you drafted this irrevocable life insurance trust for Teresa Sievers, did you draft an identical trust for Mr. Sievers?
Yes.
Okay. And again, if the roles were reversed, would Dr. Sievers then have the 5 and 5 authority?
Yes.
Would Dr. Sievers be allowed to make distributions for the health, education, maintenance, and support of the beneficiaries?
Yes.
Okay. And when people come to see you as an attorney, so you're generally trying to help them fix their problems with the law, is that correct?
Using the laws, yes.
Okay. And when you did this estate planning in 2008 and 2009, did you do the estate planning in accordance with the wishes of Dr. and Mrs. Sievers, or Mr. Sievers?
Yes.
Thank you, I have nothing further.
All right, bear with me just one moment.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm sorry, you indicated that you drafted an irrevocable trust agreement for Mark Sievers, is that correct?
Yes.
And earlier today, you presented a series of the list of the set of documents that you drafted. I'm just looking for where that particular document is among those that you presented.
You want me to help you?
I just have one last question.
Okay.
Teresa Sievers' irrevocable trust was designed for her spouse. Is that correct?
It was for the family.
Benefit of her spouse.
I'm sorry?
It was for the benefit of her spouse primarily, as stated in the trust, and then for her 2 children, correct?
It's for the whole family.
But as it's worded, it was for the benefit of the spouse primarily. That's the specific wording in the trust, correct?
There's more to it than just that. That language is meant, that language has meaning within the case law. There's
As does the specific language of a document, correct? And case law interprets the actual language that is
Yes.
included in a document, correct?
well,
Is that correct or not?
you were saying if the trust was written for the primary benefit of her spouse, and what you were referring to was the distribution language.
So the distribution language was primarily for her spouse,
That
correct?
one part, yeah.
I have nothing
It's
further.
there.
Anything further?
No, Your Honor.
This witness to be released or retained.
She may be released.
Thank you.
State,
She may be released, Your Honor.
ready to go?
Yes.
There you go.
Okay.
This way.
With that, we're close enough to 5. I think we're gonna call it a day. I'm gonna ask that you not talk about the case among yourselves or with anybody else, or look up any of the people or places involved, and we will see you all tomorrow morning at 8:30. Please be seated. You have no further witnesses other than potentially your client.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Would you like me to make inquiry now, or do you want to talk to him tonight?
If we could make inquiry tomorrow, Your Honor.
If we do that tomorrow morning, if he doesn't take the stand, you'll be resting.
I'll be resting and we can proceed right into closing arguments.
How much time does the state need for closing? Roughly, I'm not a big clock watcher, but just in case it gets out of hand.
I think 2.5 hours, Your Honor.
Defense?
Maybe no more than 3, but I think 2 to 2.5.
Defense, roughly?
I'll ask for reciprocal time, Your Honor.
Okay. You gonna talk to him now, or go visit him over?
If I could have a few minutes with him in the
You can hold on to him and let you talk to him now. If you need more time, you can go see him tonight or go come early tomorrow morning.
Yes, Your Honor.
Anything else from the state?
There's nothing further from the state.
Defense?
There, Your Honor.
See everybody tomorrow morning.